thought you'd be okay. That's pretty flattering. It wasn't like I was going to get 5%. When the election before, one of the candidates I know got 5% of the vote. So 30% sounded to me like it was a slam dunk. We're going to be great. And then I just went out, and I didn't know you couldn't get elected, and I never told the public they couldn't elect me, and so they didn't know they couldn't, and they did. Why did I get elected? And I think, and I've always believed this, and I can only give you evidence of 3 elections that I did this and I won. I think the public does not feel they have to have a lot in common with you. They don't even have to think that they agree with you. They want you to be genuine, they want to think that you really believe what you're saying and are trying to do the right thing. And then they'd say, well, I don't know if he's right or wrong, but at least he is the real McGilla and is going to do his best. And, you know, that's the good news. The bad news is that if I have a 90% approval rating, it still means 840,000 people don't like me here.
So you came
that was a great experience.
You came in at an extraordinary time.
Yeah, but that's 9/11. You want to have crises, because you can do things. You know, 9/11 was a terrible tragedy, but it gave us a chance to come back downtown Manhattan. Everybody said nobody would live there ever again. I think there were 5 hotels in those days. Today there's 25 hotels. The population down there, all these old office buildings are becoming apartment buildings, cultural things, Bed Bath & Beyond, and parks and schools and all of this sort of stuff. And it was a great opportunity to pull people together and to change the world and to get them to understand. You know, I think New Yorkers were a bit arrogant in those days, and what we saw when the rest of the world came to our aid was that, you know, we're all pretty much, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. And so we've tried to, at least I tried, and I think hopefully my successor is doing that. Whenever somebody's got a problem around the world, we should go be the first ones in line. What can we do to help? We'll send some of the PD, we'll send some firefighters, we'll send some equipment or some money or something to help, because they did that for us. But it was a great opportunity, and you know, you like things like these are challenges. So we had there was an issue one time of a group wanted to build a mosque very close to the World Trade Center site, and some of the tabs were in high dudgeon about this. This was terrible, terrible, terrible. The guy who led the charge to build the mosque had a fundraiser. He tried to raise $100 million. His first and only fundraiser raised $18,000. So he was a bit away from being able to build a mosque. But what everybody forgot was there was a mosque, an operating mosque, been there for 10, 20 years, closer to the World Trade Center than this. But from a management point of view, it was everything you'd dream about. A chance to go and to defend freedom of speech in America. That's what every elected official would die for if they think about it. And there we were on Governor's Island. I happened to be this morning cutting a ribbon. But we had a representative of every conceivable faith around the world standing behind me with the Statue of Liberty. They were sitting in front of me, and behind me is the Statue of Liberty with the cameras. This is a made-for-television, a chance to really stand up, and people keep saying, oh, you're so wonderful to do it. Wasn't that a tough decision? No, we have freedom of religion in this country. Government shouldn't tell you what religion. That was an easy thing to do. The tough thing to do is when you got to move money from the fire department to the police department, or you got to decide how much money to spend on homeless versus young people and that sort of thing. Those are the tough decisions. But the crises are things that are the easiest. It's the normal doing the job right, running the railroad. That's the tough things, and that's what everybody forgets about. And people keep saying, well, you know, what's the qualifications you'd have for being president of the United States? I think you need somebody who can run the railroad. That's what the job is. It's blocking and tackling. It's 4 million people. It's dealing with allies all around the world. It's not making great policy on controversial things, and a good executive will get plenty of people to come in and give them advice. And nobody, we keep asking these candidates what your policies are. The questions they're going to face when they are president nobody has thought about today. So what they think about past things, the generals told us how to fight that war. I'm worried about how to fight the next war. And they seldom focus on that. And so I really believe that these jobs, president, governor, mayor, they are executive jobs. They're about managing people. And the policy decisions don't play themselves, and I'm not making light of them because there are good policies and bad policies, and there's courageous policies and policies where you fade away and you're unwilling to stand up. But the basic job of government is every day making sure the services that the public needs are provided, making sure our military trains every day and is ready to defend us. When it comes to dropping an atomic bomb, everybody's going to drop the atomic bomb if we have to invade the home islands of Japan. That wasn't a difficult decision. You want to know difficult decisions? Think about Harry Truman. Here's a good example. Dropping the bomb was the easy decision. Every president would have dropped the bomb. I don't care what historians say today. Every president would have dropped the bomb. We weren't going to go in and lose a few 100,000 of our soldiers invading the home islands. But Harry Truman integrated the army, changed the social fabric of America. That was a very tough decision. Harry Truman got the Marshall Plan going. If we had a Marshall Plan after the First World War, we wouldn't have had a Second World War. Harry Truman stood up to Douglas MacArthur. Inconceivable anybody would have the guts to do that. Douglas MacArthur was a god. Nobody remembers that. Those were the tough decisions that Harry made. Dropping the bomb was not. And I think, I don't want to say that mayors and governors and presidents today have that magnitude of decisions, but there is, you got to step back and say, okay, I don't care whether you give a good speech or not. Will people follow you? Will they think you're genuine? Will they, can you get good advisors in who really know what they're doing and they can tell you how you should deal with each other?
So I'm going to come back to your mayoral term, but you've opened a land that really takes me in a slightly different direction. We'll come back to your mayoral term. In effect, you've written your own blueprint. In March of 2016, you made a serious decision about whether to run for president of the United States. And at least the reports are that, like you do for every major decision, you didn't go off half-cocked. You had studies done, analyses done. I suspect there are a lot of people in this room who might have hoped for a different conclusion. Why did you decide, given the way you've just described a good executive, not to run for president?
Well, I think the job is a great challenge, and it would have been a wonderful challenge, and I certainly, I know how to campaign. Somebody once said to me when I was thinking about running for mayor, could you give a concession speech? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, but I guess if I have to, I could stand up there and stammer a little bit, tear a little bit, but yeah, I could give a concession speech. And he said, well, then why not run? We talked about it. We had lawyers on retainer in 50 states. We rented storefronts in Texas to use to get signatures to get on the ballot in Texas. We made commercials. I'm a sort of a policy wonk, so I've been studying foreign policy and fiscal policy for a long time. I know something about governing after New York. And the problem was we could never get a poll that showed that we could get 50% of the electoral votes. Now, what you got to understand about the United States, 48 out of the 50 states have laws that say they're winner-take-all states. So in New York, it doesn't make any difference who you vote for because the Democrats will win, and in Texas, it doesn't make any difference who you vote for. The Republicans will win. And then there are swing states like Illinois and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Florida or Wisconsin, Nevada, New Hampshire maybe, where it really there's contention. It's a contentious race, and all the monies and all the time will be spent in those states. So if I came in second in every other state, it wouldn't have made any difference. You would get 0 electoral votes. And then the federal, that goes to state laws, and then the federal constitution says that if nobody has a majority, the House of Representatives picks the president and the Senate picks the vice president. And it's designed for a two-party system. And so if I were in the race, we would have gotten a decent number of votes. We could conceivably have got a third of the electoral votes, but you weren't going to get a half. And if I got a third, the other two, nobody would have half the votes, and then it would go to the House. and I do not think the House of Representatives should pick the President of the United States. I don't believe in democracy. The public. Nothing I've seen since then would change it because, I mean, look, let's get serious. Both the candidates that are running right now have high negatives, and they have a group of very rabid supporters, both of them, but it wouldn't have made any difference now or back then. You could not get to 50%, no matter how. The way you do it is you take a poll and then you read something good about the candidate to the poll and ask it again and see if it goes up. You take another group, you take the poll, you read something bad about it and see if they go down. Trump and Hillary's supporters never went up, never went down very much, no matter what you said about them. And mine, we could get to a third with the right working, explaining. A lot of the country didn't know who I was, so you'd have to introduce yourself to them, but you couldn't do more than that. And so, I just said, okay, you can't. And I wrote a thing, took me a couple days to ruminate about how to phrase it, and said, I'm not going to do it because of that. And that was it. And I don't look back. It would have been a great job. I did a lot of things in life. I don't live in a should-have, would-have, could-have world.
So look back then at your mayoral career of 12 years, your biggest accomplishment, your most satisfying accomplishment, and your biggest disappointment. And perhaps you could tie this in to something we're all living with now. One of your accomplishments has to be this remarkable drop in crime over 12 years. We've all been horrified by what's happened. The rabbi spoke about it in his oratory introduction about what's been happening now. What techniques did you use to reduce crime by a third? Why are we seeing this kind of reaction to the police now? So maybe you could tie it all together, your accomplishments, your disappointments, and then because you were on the ground in a very tough city, and yet crime was reduced by literally a third.
Yeah, okay, let's get serious here. What I did was I brought the right people into government. I'll never forget, the press always wants to write a 100-day story. After 100 days, what'd you do? And I said to the press, it was 100 days, and I said, I built a team. Yeah, right, but what'd you do? No, I spent the last 100 days building a team. You mean you didn't do anything? No, I built a team. That team basically stayed with me for 12 years in a world where nobody ever stays for one full term in government, at almost any level. There was some turnover slowly, but it was turnover. Unfortunately, as President of the United States, Barack Obama comes and takes Tom Frieden away from us. Okay, we found another guy to fill the job with the same initials, so we didn't have to change the towels. He thinks he's so good. There are other people with a TF name. But seriously, I think the things I'm most proud of, life expectancy increased by 3 years to it's better than 2 years, better than national average. Graduation rates, but more than the graduation rates, the quality of the education that the kids had when they did graduate went up dramatically, and there have been a number of outside studies that have said a lot of the things that Joel Klein and then Kathy Black and then Dennis Walcott did, my three schools chancellors, they really made a difference. It's one of the first big school systems that really made a big difference. Crime, it did in all fairness start to come down. It came down a little bit during David Dinkins' term, and then a lot during Giuliani's term, and then a lot during our term. And in all fairness, it's come down during Mayor de Blasio's term. Murder rate is down. I think it's probably because they rolled up some of the gangs that create a lot of...
So, I mean, let's contrast this. This, again, didn't just happen. You put in kind of community policing. You look at Chicago, which is another great city, crime has escalated. In New York, under your tenure, thereafter its decline. What kinds of techniques were successful?
I can't talk about Chicago or any other city, and I have said I will not talk about New York City, anything from my successor or the governor. It's a tough enough job. They don't need their predecessor taking shots at them, so I've been very careful not to. But I can tell you what we did. You're fixated on crime, let's take crime. What you do is, because I could have taken education and other things, the same thing, whatever. Number one, New York City has far and away the best trained police force in the country. If you look at the number of times the average cop per capita draws a gun in a 20-year career, all the cities are pretty much the same, and the numbers go up and down with time a little bit. If you want to include New York on that chart, you can't, because it's a flat line at 0. 80% of all New York City cops never pull their gun in 20 years on the job. They just don't, because they're very well trained, and the sergeants who are the management on the site, that's what a sergeant does, they get there quickly and they take control before anybody gets too much of a hothead. And, every once in a while there is a thing that's terrible, and we have 35,000 uniformed police officers. There's always going to be somebody's crazy, somebody that's a bad guy, somebody's a crook. But fundamentally, they are dramatically better trained than anybody else. Number two, the police department is diverse. The city is, let's say, 25% black, 25% of our police department's black. It's 1/4% Egyptian, 1/4% of our police department was born in Cairo. I mean, just go down the list. And so when people see that the cops, they think the cops understand them, and there isn't this instant dislike, which there had been before. And Ray Kelly, but not just Ray Kelly, all of his officers all the way down, all 35,000 people had a part in this. And then we deployed the police department in a sensible manner, not in a politically expedient manner. The wealthy white neighborhoods want all the cops in their neighborhoods. The trouble is there's no crime in their neighborhoods. If you want to keep crime down, you put the cops in the neighborhoods where there is crime, which is unfortunately, tragically, a lot of the poor minority neighborhoods, and that's how you get it down. So we did that. I'm a big believer. There's a cohort of young male minority kids who have no connection to their church, to their family, to school, no hopes, no understanding that there are opportunities out there. These are the poorest of the poor. These kids are totally left out. And the only thing you can do, they're the ones that have the guns. They're the ones that go shoot each other. They don't shoot outside of their group. Virtually, the MOs of the people that get shot are virtually the same as the shooters. And what you do is you've got to scare them into not carrying guns. So we had this stop and frisk policies, which was very controversial. But a very big percentage of even the minority community liked it because it got guns out of the hands of these kids. They may still have had guns, but they left them at home or hidden under a rock. And you stop that. You look at me, bang, bang, kind of spur of the moment thing. So that's another thing we did. And incidentally, the taxpayers in New York City put $8 billion a year into the police department. So with all of those things, it's not surprising. And I think Bill Bratton has followed Ray Kelly, and they're slightly different, but they're both very competent, and the results continue to be good. And you can say the same thing. I can tell you what to do in the school system and how to run it. But most of these things are the common sense, but they don't do it because there's a political group against them. That's unfortunately what happens. And one of the things that was interesting, my foundation, we created a nonprofit consulting firm, and we do some work here for Kasim in Atlanta as well. But we have, for example, the Transportation Commissioner in New York City. She ran a 12,000-person department that 6,000 miles of roads. She put in bicycle lanes and signals and this. Changed traffic patterns, closed Broadway, which was controversial, but was the right thing to do. And so if Kasim needs some advice on traffic management, the person I sent down did it. They're not a consultant in the context of they, wrote a paper in business school. This is the woman who did it, and she knows the politics of it, and she knows how you fight if the merchants don't like this, and somebody wants a left turn instead of a right turn, how you say no to a city council person who wants to have an extra parking place in front of their house, and that sort of thing. And that's the real world. And what we found when we went to these other cities, Atlanta is not that bad, but most of the cities, they didn't have small microcosms, what we had in New York. They had nothing. They just didn't have departments that focused on this. It never occurred to them to do things like having a 311 system or how you allocate resources, or there should be any policy in hiring people other than hiring your friends and that sort of thing. And so it's really shocking. But having said that, the budgets in these other cities are different, and what really annoys me is they pay lower taxes, and they get lower services, and then they complain, and they want the federal government, who's taxing all of us, to fill in instead of them reaching into their own pockets.
So your philanthropy, A lot of people make a lot of money, not a lot of people, but some make a lot of money. You decided to do something quite extraordinary with Bloomberg Philanthropies. How did you decide on the areas of interest and what are, in effect, the most, the most satisfying things? And you won, and I mentioned this, the Genesis Prize, the first Genesis Prize in Jerusalem. You've had a special linkage with Israel, New York City. Tell us about your whole philanthropic life.
Well, to begin with, I guess I've set aside some money so that I can live for the rest of my life. My kids are taken care of. And then after that, what else can you do other than to use it to make people's lives better? I don't know how else I could get satisfaction. I've got, in terms of material things, anything I want. But you don't, look in a mirror and say, God, isn't it wonderful? I have a bigger house than the guy next door. No. You want to do something that's really unique. And so Bloomberg Philanthropies tries to make people's lives longer, healthier, better. We focus on things where there isn't a lot of interest. So we try to find things outside of the normal philanthropic efforts that aren't well funded. Smoking, we've spent $600 million on smoking cessation, saved 25 million lives or something like that. The estimates are, all of the United States, every big city smoke-free, all of Latin America, all of Western Europe, even Beijing is now smoke-free. Who would have thought that? Because the Chinese own the cigarette companies. But that's one thing. We work on maternal health. We train high school graduates in Tanzania to do cesareans and appendectomies. Why? Because there are no doctors. And if you need one of those two operations, you die. So, you can tell me why these high school graduates, how can they do an operation? Turns out they're relatively simple. Most times it works, and if it doesn't work, you're going to die anyways. But you got to be willing to take risks like that. Everybody laughs about it. What would you do? Let them die? That's what most people would do, would let them die. They let them all die rather than let a few die. I don't think that way. And, we've done a lot of things around the world working on traffic safety. It's like the 6th or 7th largest killer in the world now, as more and more of these countries have automobiles and motorcycles rather than just bikes. There's a lot of those kinds of things. We work on the environment. I saw in the paper today, June came in as the hottest June on record, 14th month of record heat. There's something going on in the world, folks. This is really, really scary. Estimates of the year 2100, 2050, I don't know, at the rate that the numbers are coming in so much faster and worse than what the modeling data uses, and they redo the models, and they say that we can be at a tipping point where this Earth is just going to get hotter and hotter till we're all gone, and there's no ways to stop it. I don't know that. I hope that's not the case, but for God's sakes, a business person, if you said there's a chance of a hurricane coming along, he's not going to say, she's not going to say, I don't believe in hurricanes. Say, okay, I better go buy an insurance policy, I better build a wall, I better move the plant, do those things, otherwise the board's going to fire me. No board would let their executives just say, I don't believe the science, and that's what our Congress is trying to do. And so we've got to go. The only thing I know that could literally wipe out every single living thing down to microbes on this planet is global warming. Nuclear war, there'd probably be someplace, a tree or a frog or something survive, and then you'd have evolution all over again. It may take, a million years, but we'd come back. But if you turn this planet into Mars, it never comes back. And, there's plenty of other problems to work on, but I think climate change is one of them, so we work on that. We work on education, because that's the only hope for poor kids for the future, public education, public health.
And you've really, on education, done something quite important in terms of getting high-achieving, low-income kids and giving them access to college through your thing.
Yeah, I think you've got to take a look at, we confuse education as to what it is. There's a branch of education where you want to train the next Nobel Prize winner. You want to train the person who's going to cure cancer, write the great American novel, bring peace to the Middle East, whatever. That's at one level. There's a whole other level where what education is to teach people the basics they need to get a job and to function in society. So reading and writing and arithmetic, training. I'm a big believer in vocational schools. In New York City, we started 43 new vocational schools. I don't know if they added to that or not since then. But you know, if you have two kids and one has a chance to go to Harvard and one has a chance to be a plumber, the Harvard kid will never catch up to the plumber, because plumbers have pricing power. You need your plumber. You can't farm out plumbing. And the Harvard kid, you know, number one, it's also front-end loaded if you think about it, because you got to pay tuition rather than get a salary for the first 4 years. But even after that, one of the people that works for me, her father is a plumber. He's got 6 plumbers working for him. He's a scratch golfer. All he does is go around and play golf. We talked to him. He said, "Where else in America? You never finished high school, and you know he can build a business." So we shouldn't think of education as college is the right thing for everybody. But even if you get to college, kids get out of high school, they may get a diploma, get into college, but they can't read, they can't function, they don't understand how to work together collaboratively, collectively, they don't understand statistics and logic and that sort of thing. So a lot of that kind of education. And there are plenty of good state schools and private schools where you can get a decent education. It doesn't have to be Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. And if you take a look at who runs, you know, a lot of people, Gates, Zuckerberg, they dropped out of college. They didn't even get a college education. They seem to have done pretty well, thank you. Unfortunately, it's one of those had to finish. I think we've got to decide what we want to do in education. You've got to decide what you have to teach and who you're going to teach it to. And it may not be for everybody. You may not have to teach them everything. Some people will need skills, how to become a plumber, carpenter, electrician, plasterer, painter, whatever. Others will have to learn how to become a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, whatever. But you have to have all levels of education. What you do have to do is you have to have quality education and demand results, which means testing the kids to make sure they're learning. You start that in kindergarten. These people who don't want tests, they're condemning their kids to a lifetime of failure, I think. And it's just a disgrace. The teacher doesn't know that they're making contact with the kids unless they test them and find out. And so I don't want Johnny to think that he's not as good as Sam. Well, tell him he isn't as good, and he better get to work if he wants to be good. And not just
well, overwhelming, I have to say, resonates with me because I negotiated the Kyoto Protocol, so I appreciate what you're doing. Let's talk about contemporary political issues.
This is where you lose me.
First of all, you started after 9/11 a counterterrorism bureau in the New York City Police Department. We live in an age of terrorism. What are your thoughts, both domestically, about how we deal with it to reduce the risk here? We have some candidates who talk about preventing people from coming into the country, but how do we protect here, and what do we do with the scourge of ISIS and other terrorist groups outside of the country?
Well, it seems to me the first thing you have to do is decide how safe you want to be. I can make you perfectly safe by locking you up in your house and never letting you go outside. I don't think really anybody wants to be that safe. It's like designing an airplane that will never crash. It will be too heavy to get off the ground and cost too much for you to buy a ticket on it. So we all make compromises in terms of how safe do we want to be. If the probability of you getting killed by a terrorist is less than getting hit by lightning, then I think it probably, you know, we certainly don't want to walk away from fighting terrorism, but it is to some extent manageable, if you will, or it's a level at which we have to live with. We live in a dangerous world. There's always going to be threats. There's always going to be terrorism. And if anybody says they can wipe out terrorism, they're being ridiculous. I think we should certainly fight ISIL. I thought the country led by the president should have been more aggressive in trying to stop the chaos, the genocide in Syria. Now, keep in mind, as a Jew, I'm particularly sensitive to genocide when the world didn't come to the aid of the Jews in Germany, so don't we have a responsibility? If I'm going to criticize them, why shouldn't I feel strongly that we should go and stop the genocide of the Muslims who are getting killed in Syria? But it's even more than that. For an altruistic reason, you should do that because we're human beings, but also from the selfish reasons. By not doing that, you get this enormous wave of immigrants as well as refugees, and it's very hard to tell the difference. That's one of the problems. Everybody says, let's help the refugees, but no country has ever in history opened their borders to immigration without any controls whatsoever. But in any case, here you can't tell. But we would not have had this massive movement into Western Europe had we done something in Syria. I know it means boots on the ground, and I know nobody wants to put American troops at risk, but in the end, if you destabilize Western Europe, you go from something that wasn't at the top of your list, namely Syria, to something that really is at the top of your list in defending Europe.
But intelligence sharing is certainly part of it, and you did a great job with the Bureau.
Well, all I know is after 9/11, nobody successfully struck New York. You don't know whether or not you really stopped things. You may have scared them off, that's good, but I can't prove that they got scared off. Somebody said, I got scared off, okay, so maybe he's telling the truth, maybe he isn't. There are people who do try to do small things. We've not had anybody in America, we've had crazy people that machine gun people. We had somebody that blew up a building in Oklahoma after 9/11. But fundamentally, we have not had the chaos that you see in France, for example, of somebody driving a 18-wheeler into a crowd. Could that happen in America? Sure, it could happen in America. What are you going to do about it? You can't put bollards around every single thing. You know, so you have to try to keep your ear to the ground. If people talk about it, the thing that's hardest to stop is a lone wolf who doesn't talk to anybody, who does not want to use a bomb, so they never went on the internet to find out. They type in, how do I make a bomb? One can only pray that the CIA and the NSA is listening into that conversation. You know, you don't, they don't have to go buy lots of fertilizer, which you use to make a bomb. So if it's just an individual, there's no easy ways to stop it. We can always say we have to look for people with real psychiatric problems, but that sounds good, but I don't know, you know, all of us are a little bit crazy, some more than others, and most of us aren't probably going to go and be terrorists. Which one? A few of you are, but I just don't know which one.
You wrote a very provocative article very recently, just the last 2 weeks, and it was about an iPhone. And the article was that you felt the Apples and others of the world who make these and who are asked by our law enforcement to share data, for example, I think the San Bernardino terrorist, and they refused. This trade-off between privacy and security, and you came down quite strongly on the fact that the Apples of the world should have shared that kind of data. And